Hi guys, my name is Andrea and I am the owner of the Rejuvenation Room located in Deerfield Beach in South Florida. Today I'm going to tell you guys the true story of the true murder hotel that was located in Chicago. If you were like me, I think many of us were a little disappointed with the Cecil Hotel documentary on Netflix. So I'm going to fill you guys in on this one. So our story really is about H.H. Holmes. H.H. Holmes was America's first documented serial killer. So this is going to be good. So H.H. Holmes was born Herman Webster Mudgett. And he confessed to 27 murders, but he is believed to be responsible for over 200 murders. So we're gonna start out, I'm gonna touch base on his childhood. When he was a child, he was a very passive boy, right? He excelled in school, which I think made him an easy target for bullying, and it really made him a shy, introverted kid. So this takes place in the 1800s, and back then, they sent him to the town's doctor, and the town's doctor, his method for helping little Herman was to basically lock him in a room with a skeleton. You know, like the kind you see at the doctor's office, except back then they weren't made of plastic, they were real. And it really just kind of made him, I think, confront his fears. And it actually worked. It ended up working for him, but I think it also kind of ignited something deeper in him. Alrighty, so in 1882, he goes to grad school at the University of Michigan. He begins to study, medical school, anatomy, and chemistry, and that's where he really flourished. After medical school, he did end up in Chicago. He kind of messed around for a little bit, but he ultimately ends up in Chicago. And when he ends up in Chicago, he immediately finds a job at a local drugstore pharmacy. It was located at 63rd and Wallace in Englewood. And so 4 months after he began working at the drugstore owner actually ended up dying of natural causes. His wife ultimately disappeared shortly after, but she did end up making sure to sign the drugstore over to him first. At this point, Herman Webster Mudgett changed his name to H.H. Holmes. Between medical school and the time he spent between medical school and before he got to Chicago, I think he was already guilty of quite a few crimes. He was quite the con artist, so he ended up changing his name, not for the first or the last time, to H.H. Holmes, and that really is the one that stands out to us. So she ends up signing the drugstore over to Holmes. And now Holmes has a steady flow of income, right? In 1888, Holmes settles on an empty lot and he begins to construct this grand building. And within this building is where he is really going to act out and be able to act out his sickest fantasies. So he begins construction on his building, and it already is going to be massive, right? It is this grand structure. This was not too long after the Great Chicago Fire, so it really was a time of industrialization. And back then, seeing this big old building was really a sight to be seen. It was a grand thing to look at. You know, people would stop and, oh, what's gonna go here? And it was just interesting to people. So the people of Chicago ended up nicknaming it the Castle. And Holmes was a very smart man. Like most serial killers, very smart. Too smart for their own good. So he hired, obviously, construction workers to help him erect his building. But he would often complain, oh, their work was inadequate, they weren't doing a good job. Therefore, he would, one, fire them without pay. He refused to pay because they weren't adequate. 2, it was also his way of keeping anyone from really kind of understanding the layout of the building. So he would have them build a wall, then complain, and get someone else in there. So no one really knew, truly what he was building at. And the bottom floor of the castle was very normal. It hosted quite a few different businesses. There's a restaurant, barbershop, jewelry store, just like regular businesses. So Holmes wanted this building to become a hotel. So there were 3 stories to it. The first story held the businesses, right? So Holmes ultimately wanted to build a hotel. That is what this building was to become. So the floor level, the ground level, the street level was consisted of businesses, a restaurant, a jewelry store, barber shop, and then he had the 3rd floor, which held a bunch of rooms, vacant rooms that people could rent out to stay in. It was very legitimate. People could rent out office space. That's where his office was located. But the 2nd floor held 35 rooms, and those 35 rooms were meant to be designed as killing chambers. He had trapdoors, doors that led to nowhere. He had staircases that were unnecessary, just multiple staircases to really confuse people. You're in this, I get confused as shit at a hotel, so I couldn't imagine. So he intentionally built it to be this labyrinth, right? And very chillingly, he had a quick method of hiding his bodies. So if you were a guest of the hotel was very confusing, being able to find your room again, it got messy and confusing. And that was his intention. That's what he wanted. So he actually had a laundry chute on the 2nd floor that led to the basement, and that laundry chute was greased. So he would take his victims' bodies after killing them on the 2nd floor and toss them down the chute, where they would end up in the basement. And the basement was straight up horrific. That was a medieval torture room for sure. So the basement consisted, there was crazy shit in there. He had acid vats, he had quicklime pits, he had one of those stretchers, the old medieval stretchers. He had a crematorium in there that he disguised as like glass mending furnace. I'm sure back then that was easy to pass off. But quicklime pit, like what? But for me, one of the most chilling parts of all of it is that he would take the bodies of his victims and strip them of the flesh off their body. Probably what he used the quicklime pit and acid vats for. He would strip them of their flesh and then sell their cleaned off skeleton to the local universities and hospitals. Those skeletons that you see. Ugh, that really creeps me out to think about. So Holmes was a bit of a ladies' man. I mean, realistically, he was a successful businessman. He was a young doctor. He was very charming, as most serial killers. He was very manipulative. He spoke well, very affluent, right? So in 1890, there was a woman named Julia Smith who had come to work for him. And she did become his mistress as well. Julia Smith had, she was like his assistant, right? So she and her daughter ended up going to live at the mansion, at the castle. So Julia becomes pregnant with Holmes's child. And so she demands a marriage, and Holmes agrees, surprisingly. Holmes agreed to marry her, but only if she would allow him to perform an abortion on her. And she agreed. Her and her daughter Pearl were never seen or heard from again. A week later, he sent a clean skeleton to the Hahnemann College for $200, which is roughly $4,000 in today's money. In 1892, he had another mistress named Emily, and she was also an employee. She was his secretary. And one day, he tells her, "Hey, I need you to get some documents out of this vault for me." And the vault was huge. The vault was massive. It was enough that you could walk into it to grab. It held quite a bit. So Holmes does ask Emily, "Hey, would you mind going in the vault for me and grabbing something from me?" And of course she did. So as she's in the vault grabbing the whatever it is that he requested, he shut her in. And I mean, she slowly suffocated to death in that vault, and I'm sure he listened. In 1893, a woman named Minnie becomes Holmes's new secretary and mistress. He clearly loved mixing business and pleasure. So Minnie becomes his new secretary, and Minnie at the time was the beneficiary of a large house valued at $40,000 located in Texas. So he convinces her, "Oh, please invite your sister to Chicago. I want to take you guys to Europe. It's going to be awesome." And then he kills them both after they sign the property to him. In 1894, he ends up marrying a woman named Georgina Yoke, and she becomes Holmes's third wife, actually. And he ends up marrying her under a fake name, Henry Mansfield Holland. Like his other two wives, they lived out the entirety of their lives. Okay, so it is now May 1st, 1893, the beginning of something called the Chicago World Fair, which was this grand new renovation of Chicago, which brought in a ton of tourism. So Holmes utilizes all of this tourism as the perfect opportunity to really put his demented castle to use. I mean, he went ahead and renovated the entire third floor, spared no expenses on making it the most comfortable luxury hotel around. And I mean, he put that all on credit. This is his MO. He's a con man. So Holmes goes around. He's putting out ads in the newspaper. He is also going around and really looking for older, well-to-do women who are a lot older, who seem to be there alone, just really checking out Chicago. So Holmes would go around and he would look for women who seemed a little more well-off, a little well-to-do, wealthier women who were there by themselves, really just trying to check out Chicago and see the city. So he would tell them, "Hey ma'am, I have the most beautiful hotel. It's comfortable, it's warm. I know you'll just love to stay there." So they would go to Chicago and they would never be heard from or seen again. And I mean, think of the victims' families. Really, how are they going to track these people down? How are they even going to begin to track down their missing family members? And of course, I don't believe this goes for everyone who stayed at the murder hotel. I think plenty of people did come and go as regular hotel guests. Then there were others who would meet a very grisly end and they would disappear and never get the chance to check out. So Holmes had his own home office, and within that home office, he had a master control panel. It controlled the gas lines that led into some of the rooms on the second floor. Those rooms that were really meant to be asphyxiation chambers, they were gas chambers. And so, he would lead you up to your room. "Oh, okay, this one is going to be yours. And, oh, it looks so nice, blah, blah, blah." And then he would lock you in unknowingly. And once he locked you in, it did become an airtight room. No windows, nothing. And then He would then turn on the gas lines, and he would watch through peepholes as they slowly suffocated. He would then take the bodies and use that laundry chute I had mentioned. And he would send them into the basement where he would strip them of their flesh and then sell their skeletons. So at this point, really during the Chicago World Fair, was also a very, very high point for Holmes. Holmes had his many businesses operating. He had money from selling the skeletons. He was renting out rooms, and he definitely wasn't paying any of his creditors back. So a man named Ben Peitzel comes to Chicago. Ben was a husband and a father who had been traveling around the Midwest, just working odd jobs, really looking for stability. And Ben had a wife named Claire and 5 children. Desi, who was 17, the oldest, Nellie, Alice, Howard, and an infant named Warden. So Ben had a background himself. He had been arrested before, he had been in trouble with the law, and he was known to be a bit of a heavy drinker. And but I will say one thing that they did specifically mention was that he loved his family very much, and he would work any job he could to provide for them. Could you imagine the stress of 5 children and a wife when you were the only working person in the family at the time? So he ends up answering an ad in the newspaper, an ad for a job that led him to Holmes. And after meeting H.H. Holmes, the rest was really history for the two. Him and Holmes became very close. He became Holmes's right-hand man. And I believe he knew of Holmes's atrocities, and after a while, supposedly his drinking was getting heavier, and guests and workers at the hotel would be able to hear Ben Peitzel and Holmes arguing in the night. And so Holmes knew that Ben was aware of the atrocities he performed as well. He was aware, he knew what the fuck he was doing. So he did start to get paranoid that Ben was going to have some loose lips. So Holmes really felt that, oh, okay, well, Ben has served his purpose for me. I'm done with him. He's outlived his usefulness. So he devises a plan. He persuades Ben. He says, listen, I've done this before. It was successful. It's going to work. Take out a life insurance plan for yourself and make your wife the beneficiary. Take out a large sum of money for your plan, and I have easy access to cadavers, he tells him. Oh, I have easy access to cadavers. We'll just fake your death so you can collect the life insurance money. So, Ben agrees, and they decide that they're going to fake Ben's death in the city of Philadelphia, because that is where the insurance company was located. I'm assuming it kept them away from Chicago, kept them away from Ben's family, and I'm sure it kept them away from Holmes's horrific castle. So in 1893, they put the plan to action, and for months, because they had to travel by train, Ben and Holmes are just bopping around the country on their way to Philly, just committing a bunch of frauds on the way. And they're in St. Louis, and Holmes tries to swindle some drugstore owner, probably for something petty, and it doesn't work. And for the first time in his criminal career, he is under arrest. Craziest thing, Holmes shared a cell with a notorious outlaw at the time named Marion Hedgepath. And Hedgepath And Holmes decided to tell them their plan, the insurance fraud plan, which was a little, out of character seemingly, but I suppose he was talking to another guy kind of like him. I'm sure not to the extent. So Holmes tells him their plan for the insurance fraud, and Hedgepath actually gives him the information to a corrupt lawyer who would help them collect the insurance money. So Holmes says, all right, word, I got you. I'm gonna send you $500 when we receive that money. And Holmes eventually gets out, and his wife, Georgina, bails him out, and he proceeds to Philadelphia. Well, as we know, bad things happen in Philadelphia. Just kidding. I love Philly. So, on Callowhill Street, right across from Reading Terminal Market, pretty much, the building is no longer there, but they end up choosing this location for their insurance scam. Ben tells his wife all of the details that they are going to go through with this insurance scam. She begs him not to, but he continues to do it anyways. Ben, am I right? So Ben changes his name to B.F. Perry, and he is a man who sells patents for new inventions and whatnot. So this building that they had gotten on Callowhill Street served as their home, their shelter, and the location of where he sells his patents. So a gentleman who needed his services, who needed a patent, goes to his office, and he realizes the office was just off. It was a little empty, it was just off. So he kind of just goes around, and he's looking for, all right, where's B.F. Perry? I'm here to get a patent. The man ended up going upstairs and finding the body of B.F. Perry. B.F. Perry, whose body was supposed to be a cadaver, it was the body of Ben Peitzel. Holmes had chloroformed him and used the gasoline that was there to light his face and body on fire and disfigure him. Holmes ends up writing these letters, and I'll get to them later. He ends up writing these letters, and in these letters, he says that 1, Ben was the closest thing he ever had to a brother. 2, that he had woken up when he was disfiguring him and setting him on fire. So, honestly, just 2 horrifically opposite statements from him. So, as you can imagine, forensics was bullshit back then. It was non-existent. This was late 1800s. So his body needed to legally be identified by a family member in order for the insurance company to, it needed to be identified. So Holmes heads back to Chicago. And in Chicago, he meets Carrie, and, Carrie at the time, she is sick. She is sick, the infant is sick, her oldest daughter is sick as well. So Carrie is struggling. She's desperate at this point. And I think she's really hoping for that insurance money, because now she needs medicine and she needs food to take care of their 5 children. And there's no money coming in. So, that's stressful. So Holmes comes back, and Holmes tells Carrie, plan's going perfectly. Your husband, he's hiding underground. To her belief, everything is working perfectly. He's alive and well. So she is unable to go with Holmes to Philadelphia to claim the body of Peitzel. And so she sends her second oldest child, Alice, to go with H.H. Holmes and verify the body. So the coroner's office did end up ruling his death accidental. And she ends up getting the money. I believe he cons her out of most of it. But she does end up receiving the money. And so Holmes heads back to Chicago after that without Alice. And Carrie's kind of like, where's my child? And he's like, oh, she's fine. She's with your husband. She's just like with her dad underground. So Kara's like, all right. So Holmes convinces her, hey, listen, like, we're still not in the clear. I just need to let you know that I think it's in your best interest if you, why don't you let me bring a couple more of the kids to Philly with their dad, because he'll be able to take care of them better. Also, it's kind of suspect, you know, insurance company might come looking for you to ask more questions, and you just kind of want to stay low-key, and you can't really stay low-key with 4 other children. So she's like, okay, you know, think about it. He knows how to speak. He knows how to persuade. We all know those people who just speak well, who could probably convince, especially people, he can convince people and manipulate. So this is where it begins to get pretty messy. It is now October 1894. And he is traveling. She took 2 of the children, the 2 middle children, and he begins to really use them as pawns to just mess with this family. It's probably how he got a lot of the money, the insurance money as well. Oof, oof. So he's traveling with the 2 kids. He's using them as pawns, and he's just manipulating the hell out of this family, right? But at this time, he goofs. He makes a big mistake. He never sent that money to Hedgepath. He never sent that money to his cellmate Hedgepath. And Hedgepath remembers. Hedgepath ends up seeing the death. He ends up reading about the death in the newspaper of this accidental fire. And he knows that it is Holmes executing his insurance fraud plan. And he's salty. He said, oh no, you promised me $500 and I didn't get that. So he tells the warden. He makes sure that it gets back to the insurance company and that they know that there's this fraudulence going on. So this begins Holmes's demise, truly. They sent the Pinkertons after him, and at the time, the Pinkertons was this really successful detective agency who was known to be able to track anyone down in America. And my eyes tingling from this. And so the Pinkertons, actually, fun fact, were the ones who created the mugshot. And in November 17th, Holmes is found and arrested by the Pinkertons in Boston. So he is transferred to prison in Philadelphia. He is tried for conspiracy to treat and to defraud the insurance company. He is suspected of murdering Ben at this point. He is still insisting that Ben committed suicide. Not only this, but at this same time, Carrie's like, cool, you've been arrested in Boston. You're now in Philadelphia. Ben's actually dead. Where are my children? Where are my children? Carrie still has 2 of her children. She has her oldest Nellie and her baby Warden. And her now 3 middle children were supposed to be under Holmes's and Ben's care this entire time. And so Holmes keeps making up stories, right? Detectives keep coming in and questioning him in his cell. Oh, where are the children? And he is just having a great time making up these stories. I mean, realistically, if they weren't coming to visit him, he would have no visitors. To him, this is entertainment while he's locked up. He's entertaining himself while he's locked up. And because he keeps making these stories, there's definitely beginning to be more suspicion that he killed these children. So they end up assigning a detective named Frank Geyer to the case. And Frank was very confident, I'm going to find these children for you. So the whole time that Holmes had taken Alice, the first child, to Philadelphia, she had been writing her mom, you know, filling her in on the journey, and she was getting really upset her mom was never responding to her. Her mom was never responding to her because Holmes was never actually sending the letters. And so he had them still. So Frank ends up finding these letters, and I mean, it's a straight up paper trail of where they went. And I think that really, really helped Detective Geyer locate the children. So after several months of very heroic detective work, he is able to locate the bodies of the children. The son, Howard, they had found his charred remains in a stove in a house in Indianapolis. The girls were found in Toronto. Both of their bodies were dug up. One of the bodies of the girls had her feet. Her feet were missing. They were cut off. And it was because Alice was clubfoot. So as a way to prevent them from being able to detect the bodies, Holmes had just removed her feet and cut them off. So this gets out, it becomes public knowledge, and Holmes is painted nationally as this monster, rightfully so. But he clearly has been deemed capable of doing anything. The most horrific of events he's capable of doing now. He's a monster. So, in July of 1895, the Chicago PD finally decide we're going to go into Holmes's castle and we're going to check it out. And I don't think any of them were prepared to find what they found. I mean, in the basement alone, the authorities found multiple torture devices, human and animal bones, bloody undergarments, and a wooden dissection table that had just been saturated in dried blood. And even back then, people were into murder. I'm sure back then people were more into murder. I mean, that was back when the town would get together to watch the hanging of the local criminals and probably cheer it on. So a lot of people would stop after, people found out what had actually occurred at that hotel. A lot of people would stop by in awe and mesmerized, and a lot of people were hoping to kind of turn it into a murder museum and tourist attraction. And I'm assuming someone related to the victims, or maybe even just someone who said, no, this shouldn't become a money-making cash cow of a building based off horrible, horrific events there. In the middle of the night, it was burned down. And they never knew who, but I'd imagine it may have been someone with that motive who didn't want it to become a famous building in that way. So, like any serial killer, Holmes is just concerned about himself. He is reading the newspaper, seeing that his name is really being smeared. Holmes he wants to clear his name. So he begins to write his own version of what happened, because he knew that the people would read it. It was just a bunch of bullshit of how he was innocent and things didn't play out like they did and blah, 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 blah. So at this point, he does have a trial date set, so he can finally stand trial for his many heinous crimes. It was held at Philadelphia City Hall in October on 1885. He pulled a Bundy. I guess Bundy pulled a Holmes. Like a true psycho, he decided to dismiss his counsel and defend and represent himself. He, of course, wanted to be able to control the courtroom, and he wouldn't be able to do that if he gave the power for someone else to speak on his behalf. He was just filled with just your typical manipulation and theatrics. He put on quite a show. And Holmes starts to fail. He starts to see it's not going his way. So he's like, all right, lawyers, come back. Because realistically, I mean, he can put the blame on them if it doesn't go the way he wants it to go. On the third day of the trial, a woman dressed in all black enters the courtroom. That woman is Carrie. Carrie, who is now 37, is said to look decades older after the death of her husband and her 3 children. She was given the letters that Alice had written her, and it had caused her, of course, to begin sobbing, just reading her daughter's letters to her that she never got to have, really the last connection she has to her, and really the only answer she may truly get for what happened to Alice after she left Carrie's custody. This sends the entire courtroom into hysterics. I mean, everyone is just emotional. People are crying. The judge, the jury, the lawyers, the police, everyone is crying. The people watching, the bystanders. And everyone's just in emotional distress except for Holmes, who is just indifferent. He is said to be doodling at this time. And the trial continues and spectators are coming out more and more. Everyone wants to get a look at the torture doctor. It's becoming a big deal. I mean, very similar to our, OJ case, all of that. So they call in his most current wife, Georgina Yoke, and ask her, oh, do you know about all this? And they're asking her questions now. And everyone is shocked at this point that Holmes, he now begins sobbing uncontrollably at the sight of his wife. And it really makes you think, because this is the man who didn't give a fuck about Carrie's Carrie, when she was up there crying over her literal family that had been destroyed. It really makes you think, was that legitimate? Did he feel emotions, embarrassment, shame, and guilt in front of his wife? Or did he kind of, oh, I missed the cue to cry, I need to now make sure that I can show people I have emotion? Was it just a form of manipulation for him? Oh, I'm capable of emotion now. So the defense ends up closing. The defense closes the case without allowing Holmes to stand trial or to answer any questions. And the crowd's pissed. The spectators, the people watching, that's what they've been waiting for. They've been trying to see, what does this man have to say for himself? And so Holmes is found guilty of murder in the 1st degree. Herman Webster Mudgett is to be hanged on May 7th, 1896. And you would think this is the end of the story, but it's not. So Holmes, who basically thinks, all right, I don't got shit to lose anymore. What's in it for, they can't do anything to me. I don't have anything to lose. So he begins writing his own manifesto. I don't know what constitutes a manifesto, but he begins writing his own of all right, I'm gonna tell you guys what really happened, okay? So he begins writing of all the horrific murders that he had done. And realistically, as a serial killer, he was reliving those moments. Emily, the mistress who was locked in the vault, he recounts her slow death. He confesses, oh, the footprint that you had found inside of the vault the police had found, that was because she was in there. The police had also found a wall that had been heavily clawed. Just absolutely clawed at. And he says, oh, that was a gentleman named Robert Latimer who had been trying to scratch his way out of the gas-filled room with his bare hands. He recounts a man named Wade Warner, and he says, I burned him until there was not even bones remaining. The police, and then he recounts Ben Peitzel, and how he was a trickier murder than the rest because, well, he had to he couldn't have any signs of struggle, you know? So he says, how I did it, I bound him by his hands and feet. I bound him, I got him drunk, I bound him by his hands and feet, and then I chloroformed him and burned him. He says he woke up and started burning him alive by saturating his clothes and face with gas and igniting a match. Once Peitzel had stopped breathing, and then you have his son, Howard Peitzel, the one who had been found in the stove in Indianapolis. Holmes confesses to strangling Howard, the child. Once he had stopped breathing, he admitted to cutting him into pieces and burning him with as little feeling as if he were an inanimate object. He recounts Alice and Nellie Peitzel. He said he took them to what they called the Vincent Street house, and he convinces them to get into this trunk. He convinces them to get into this large trunk, and through the top of the trunk, once he closed it, he put a little hole, a small opening in it, where he would put a gas line. And he locked him in the trunk and turned on the gas line and slowly suffocated them as well. He opens the trunk and recalls seeing their blackened, distorted faces. And then he takes them and he buries them in a shallow grave in the basement of the house. He concludes his writing with how he no longer recognizes himself. He instead is taking on the features of the devil. He says, I quote, I was born with the devil inside of me. I could not help the fact that I was a murderer, no more than a poet can help the inspiration to sing. On May 7th, 1896, right before he was to be hanged, Holmes retracts everything he had said and written as a last-ditch effort to try to walk free. And on May 7th, 1896, Holmes was hanged 9 days before his 35th birthday. That is a short story of the gruesome, horrific story of H.H. Holmes. I implore you to do your own research. Most of what I had gotten was from a documentary I saw on YouTube. It was on Netflix back in the day, called H.H. Holmes, America's First Serial Killer. So there is a famous book as well called Devil in the White City, which does speak of Holmes. I don't think it is completely based off Holmes, centered completely around him, but it is based off him and it mentions him. Martin Scorsese was supposed to cast Leonardo DiCaprio in a TV show series based off Devil in the White City. If you have any information on it, please send it my way, because when I look it up, it seems to have already existed and been made, but I can't find it anywhere. I hope you enjoyed this. I am hoping to do these films regularly. They will not always be based off true crime and murder. A lot of them will also be weird history, but if you have any suggestions, please DM them to me or comment them below. I hope you enjoyed this.